Gurdjieff's most dangerous discovery was not about madness, pathology, or abnormal psychology. It was about what happens to a human being who begins to awaken inside a world that is still asleep, and why this partial awakening destroys people who are not prepared to carry it. Gurdjieff considered this ability to see mechanicalness extremely dangerous, not because it grants power, but because it removes illusion. Illusion is what allows the sleeping man to function. Once the illusion begins to crack, the person who sees it cannot return to ordinary participation in life. And without inner structure, this perception becomes a source of isolation, exhaustion, and inner fragmentation. Gurdjieff warned that the greatest danger is not complete sleep, but partial awakening. A man who is fully asleep suffers unconsciously and remains relatively stable. A man who is fully awake acts intentionally and carries responsibility. But a man who awakens only a little is torn apart. He sees too much. He becomes divided against himself. In Gurdjieff's early groups, this pattern appeared repeatedly. Certain individuals arrived not as blank slates, but already wounded by perception. They had begun to see through social masks. They sensed falseness in speech. They felt emotional tension before it was expressed. They noticed contradictions in others that most people unconsciously ignore. One such woman, described indirectly through notes, displayed an extraordinary sensitivity to inner states. She could enter a room and immediately feel the atmosphere. She sensed hostility beneath friendliness, sadness beneath laughter, and manipulation beneath kindness. But instead of helping her, this perception destroyed her ability to live normally. Conversations felt unbearable. People reacted defensively to her presence. She was accused of being negative, arrogant, or disturbing, even when she said very little. Gurdjieff did not see illness. He saw a person whose perception had developed in one center, while the rest of her being remained mechanical. She could see, but she could not hold what she saw. She absorbed impressions without filtering them. She lacked inner boundaries. According to Gurdjieff, man is a multiplicity. He does not have one unified self, but many small I's that alternate control. One I wants to be disciplined, another wants comfort. One I seeks truth, another wants approval. Most people never observe this because identification is constant, but those with heightened perception see these shifts clearly. They notice how sincerity vanishes under pressure, how morality dissolves under temptation, how personality changes with environment. This perception alone is enough to create suffering. But the real danger emerges when such individuals live among sleeping people. Their presence threatens unconscious identification. People sense, without understanding, that something in them is being seen. This creates discomfort, hostility, and projection. Gurdjieff explained this reaction through the concept of buffers. Buffers are psychological shock absorbers that prevent man from experiencing inner conflict. They allow contradictory beliefs to coexist without tension. A person can believe themselves honest while lying, loving while resenting, spiritual while acting cruelly. Buffers maintain sleep. Highly perceptive individuals often lack strong buffers. They feel contradictions directly. When they encounter contradictions in others, they sense them immediately. And when these contradictions are reflected, even unintentionally, the sleeping person reacts violently. Gurdjieff stated clearly that people defend their sleep as they would defend their life. To threaten a person's sleep is to threaten their identity. This is why those who see mechanicalness often become scapegoats. They are blamed for problems they did not create. They are accused of causing tension, negativity, or conflict simply because their presence destabilizes unconscious agreements. Groups function through unspoken rules about what will not be seen or spoken. The perceptive individual violates these rules simply by existing. Gurdjieff observed that this dangerous perception manifests differently depending on which center awakens first. Some individuals awaken emotionally. They absorb the feelings of others automatically. They carry anxiety, sadness, and anger that do not belong to them. Without conscious work, they become emotionally exhausted and confused, unable to distinguish their own inner state from what they have absorbed. Others awaken intellectually. They see patterns, predict outcomes, and recognize consequences long before others do. They notice where relationships are heading, where institutions will fail, and where individuals are deceiving themselves. But without emotional development, this clarity hardens into bitterness. They feel isolated, misunderstood, and superior, which further disconnects them from others. Some awaken through the moving or instinctive centers. They sense physical tension, illness, fatigue, and stress before it becomes visible. They notice subtle changes in posture, breath, and movement. They feel bodily discomfort that reflects emotional states in others. Without boundaries, they become drained and anxious. The rarest and most dangerous case is when perception awakens across multiple centers without inner unity. These individuals receive enormous amounts of information without structure. They feel overwhelmed, fragmented, and unable to organize their experience. Gurdjieff considered this state unsustainable without conscious discipline. This is why Gurdjieff rejected the romanticization of sensitivity. He did not praise openness, empathy, or receptivity as virtues in themselves. He warned that sensitivity without self-mastery leads to disintegration. A person becomes a receiver without a center, an instrument played by external impressions. The most serious danger Gurdjieff identified was loss of identity. When perception develops without self-remembering, the individual disappears behind the function. They become awareness without an owner, observation without presence. They no longer know who is seeing. This leads to inner collapse. Gurdjieff insisted that perception must be paired with conscious attention. Self-remembering must come before deeper seeing. Without it, awareness consumes the individual instead of transforming them. He defined self-remembering as the ability to be aware of oneself while experiencing impressions, not thinking about oneself, but being present. He studied historical examples to understand the difference between perception that destroys and perception that transforms. He regarded Nietzsche as an example of extraordinary insight without sufficient inner structure. Nietzsche saw through morality, religion, and social hypocrisy with devastating clarity. But lacking inner discipline, his perception turned into an attack. Insight consumed him instead of liberating him. In contrast, Gurdjieff pointed to disciplined spiritual traditions that combined perception with structure, humility, and obedience to a method. These traditions produced individuals who could see deeply without being destroyed by what they saw. They became transmitters of knowledge rather than victims of insight. When perception is integrated, something fundamental changes. The individual no longer feels compelled to expose others. They no longer absorb what does not belong to them. They no longer need to correct, rescue, or confront. They see clearly without. Gurdjieff called this state the emergence of real I, a stable center of gravity that allows perception without fragmentation. Real I does not react mechanically. It chooses. Gurdjieff's most dangerous discovery was not that some people see through illusion. It was that most who begin to see are destroyed by it, not by society, but by lack of inner work. Society merely reacts. The collapse happens inside. You are not broken because you see too much. The question is not whether you should dull your perception to fit into a sleeping world. The question is whether you will develop the ability required to carry what you see. Awakening without preparation is dangerous. Awakening with discipline is transformative. Gurdjieff warned repeatedly that accidental awakening leads to suffering, while intentional awakening leads to freedom. If you recognize yourself in this description, you are rare, but you are not special. Insight alone grants no superiority. Only work does. Gurdjieff warned that identification with insight is one of the fastest paths back into sleep. The task is not to see less, but to become more, to build inner structure, to develop attention, to remember yourself, to suffer consciously, to transform perception into being. The path forward is not comfort, it is work. And it begins with the recognition that seeing is not enough. Gurdjieff insisted that this responsibility cannot be delegated. No teacher, no group, no system can carry perception for you. A man must become capable of bearing the truth within himself. This is why Gurdjieff rejected comfort, reassurance, and emotional consolation. He did not want followers. He wanted workers. He wanted people who could endure the friction between what they see and what they are. He observed that many perceptive individuals secretly hope that seeing will save them. They believe that insight itself is transformation. Gurdjieff dismantled this illusion completely. He taught that insight without being only increases inner contradiction. A man who sees his mechanicalness but cannot stop it suffers more than a man who never notices it at all. This is why many perceptive people experience despair rather than liberation. They see the lie, but they are still compelled to live it. They recognize falseness, yet continue to participate in it. They feel the weight of contradiction without possessing the strength to resolve it. Gurdjieff warned that this state often leads to cynicism, bitterness, or withdrawal, all of which deepen sleep rather than end it. He explained that perception multiplies responsibility. The more you see, the less excuse you have. The sleeping man can hide behind ignorance. The partially awakened man cannot. Until it is developed, awareness is heavy. Gurdjieff also warned that highly perceptive individuals often misinterpret their suffering. They believe they suffer because the world is unconscious. In reality, they suffer because they are divided. They suffer because they see with one part of themselves while remaining mechanical in the rest. The conflict is internal, not external. This misunderstanding leads many perceptive people to reject society entirely. They withdraw, isolate, or retreat into intellectual or spiritual superiority. Gurdjieff regarded this as a failure. Withdrawal is not transcendence. Isolation is not awakening. Avoiding friction preserves weakness. He taught that conscious work must take place within life. Family, work, relationships, and conflict are not obstacles to awakening. They are the material. Without friction, nothing can be transformed. The perceptive individual who avoids life avoids development. He taught that only voluntary suffering builds being. Everything else is accidental. Highly perceptive individuals often experience accidental suffering constantly. They absorb impressions, emotions, and tensions without choice. This suffering weakens them. Conscious suffering is different. It is chosen. It is directed. It strengthens. Gurdjieff taught that conscious suffering begins with restraint, not expressing every reaction, not acting on every impulse, not identifying with every perception. This restraint creates inner space. In that space, a real center can begin to form. Without this center, perception remains chaotic. With it, perception becomes precise. The individual no longer drowns in impressions. He uses them. Gurdjieff described this process as crystallization. Being does not grow gradually. It crystallizes under pressure. Perceptive individuals experience intense pressure early in life. This is not a mistake. It is a test. Some collapse under this pressure. Others harden incorrectly, becoming rigid, judgmental, or cold. But a few learn to endure pressure consciously. These are the ones who transform perception into strength. Gurdjieff warned that this path is not fair. Some people are never tested. Others are tested relentlessly. Perceptive individuals are tested early because they can see the test. He insisted that fairness is a concept of sleep. A man is given what he can work with, not what he prefers. This is why complaining about sensitivity, awareness, or insight is useless. These are raw materials. What matters is what you do with them. Gurdjieff taught that real work begins when a man stops asking why he is this way and starts asking how he can change his being. Questions of identity are replaced by questions of effort. He also warned that perceptive individuals often seek recognition. They want others to validate what they see. This desire traps them. Recognition strengthens personality, not essence. True work proceeds without witnesses. This is why many who awaken partially feel invisible. Their insights are not welcome. Their perceptions are ignored or attacked. External validation would inflate the wrong part. Real development is silent. When a man truly changes, he speaks less about it, not more. Perception becomes internal. Action becomes measured. At advanced stages, the perceptive individual no longer reacts emotionally to unconsciousness in others. No hatred, no sense of superiority or pity. This does not mean indifference. It means freedom from identification. Withdrawal without conscious work does not free a man from sleep. It only isolates him within it. True work requires engagement, friction, and intentional effort in the midst of ordinary conditions. Gurdjieff taught that the world exists exactly as it is to create the necessary resistance for awakening. Other people, with their contradictions, emotions, and unconscious reactions, are not obstacles to development, but material for it. The perceptive individual who resents others for being asleep has failed to understand the purpose of life. Sleep in others is not an insult, it is a fact. The task is not to escape it, but to work within it consciously. Another danger Gurdjieff identified was emotional identification with what is seen. Perceptive individuals often feel responsible for the suffering they observe. They experience guilt for noticing it and helplessness for being unable to change it. Gurdjieff warned that this sense of responsibility is false. A man is responsible only for his own being. To take responsibility for others' unconsciousness is another form of identification that drains energy and weakens inner stability. He also warned against the temptation to explain. People who see clearly often feel compelled to articulate what they perceive. They try to describe mechanical behavior, contradictions, and unconscious motives to others. Gurdjieff stated that explanations given at the wrong time are useless and even harmful. Words do not awaken people. Shock does. And shock must come from life, not preaching. Explaining without permission only strengthens resistance and feeds the ego of the explainer. Gurdjieff emphasized silence as a discipline, not silence as withdrawal, but silence as restraint. The ability to see without speaking, to know without asserting, to observe without interfering. This restraint builds inner strength. It prevents the leakage of energy. It also protects the perceptive individual from unnecessary conflict with sleeping people. He taught specific practices to stabilize perception. One of these was intentional suffering through the restraint of expression. Another was the conscious observation of negative emotions without justification. Perceptive individuals often react strongly to injustice, hypocrisy, and falseness. Gurdjieff taught that reacting mechanically to these impressions only deepens sleep. Observing the reaction without acting on it creates inner friction, which is essential for development. Gurdjieff also insisted on the importance of physical grounding. Many perceptive individuals live almost entirely in emotional or intellectual impressions. They neglect the body. This imbalance increases instability. He required physical work, movement, and attention to posture and sensation as a way to anchor awareness. Conscious movement brings perception back into the body, preventing dissociation and fragmentation. He warned that without grounding, perception becomes fantasy. Gurdjieff distinguished sharply between imagination and real perception. Imagination feels vivid, but lacks verification. Real perception is sober, precise, and often disappointing. It does not flatter the observer. It humbles him. Another critical element Gurdjieff emphasized was the role of effort. Awakening does not happen naturally. It requires sustained, intentional effort against inertia. Perceptive individuals often believe their sensitivity exempts them from discipline. Gurdjieff rejected this completely. He taught that those who see more require more effort, not less. Greater perception increases responsibility. He observed that many people with heightened perception collapse during periods of stress, illness, or life change. Their inner structure, never fully developed, fails under pressure. Gurdjieff warned that development is not linear. Without constant attention, a man can lose in a moment what took years to build. This is why he emphasized daily work, not occasional insight. Gurdjieff also spoke about the necessity of guidance. He warned that self-directed awakening is extremely dangerous for perceptive individuals. Without an external mirror, a man easily deceives himself. He mistakes imagination for awareness, emotion for conscience, and rebellion for freedom. A teacher, a group, or a method provides friction and correction that the individual cannot supply alone. At the same time, Gurdjieff warned against dependency. The goal of work is independence, not attachment. Guidance is a temporary necessity, not a permanent crutch. The perceptive individual must eventually stand alone, with real I as the center of gravity. When integration begins to occur, the perception changes in quality. It becomes quieter, less reactive, less dramatic. The individual no longer feels special for seeing. Seeing becomes normal, ordinary, almost boring. Gurdjieff considered this a good sign. True development is not exciting, it is sobering. He taught that the final danger for perceptive individuals is despair. Seeing mechanicalness everywhere can lead to the belief that awakening is impossible, and effort is meaningless. Gurdjieff rejected this pessimism. He taught that development is rare but real. It is not for everyone, but it is possible for some. And for those capable of it, it is the only meaningful task. Gurdjieff's dangerous discovery was ultimately this: that perception alone does not save a man. In fact, it often destroys him faster than ignorance ever could. This is why he insisted that awakening is not a right, not a gift, and not a reward. It is work, it is earned, and it must be paid for with effort, discomfort, and sustained attention. If you see too much, your task is not to escape the world, correct others, or numb your perception. Your task is to become someone who can stand upright inside reality without collapsing, to build inner unity where there was fragmentation, to develop presence where there was reaction. The danger is not that you see what others do not see. The danger is that you may remain exactly as you are while seeing it. That was Gurdjieff's warning. Gurdjieff made it clear that this path is not meant to comfort a man, but to correct him. Everything that feels painful in conscious work is painful because it contradicts mechanical habit. This pain is not a mistake. It is the signal that something real is happening. A man who avoids this discomfort will never stabilize perception, no matter how sharp his insight may be.